Hey, you guys, welcome back to the Beautifully Changed podcast. I'm Steph, your host. You are going to love today's episode. Today, Hans Struzyna is our guest, and he has some phenomenal perspectives to share. So not only did Hans marry his college roommate, has the ability to make amazing risotto without a recipe, he had a 12-year rowing career that took him to the 2016 Rio Olympic Games. How cool is that? His wife, Kristen, is also an Olympic rower, right? Phenomenal. So Hans has worked to train his mind to push himself through the discomfort and to make patience his friend instead of an inconvenience. Hans was able to transition from spending years rowing to his next journey of being a realtor and investing. He was able to identify and shift limiting beliefs that were in his way and developed a system that works for him to find gratitude in every day. Hans currently spends his time loving life with his wife and professionally is a realtor partner with the Gunderman Group, which is a pretty great company to be a part of since they have a family type environment and are a Wall Street Journal top 100 nationally ranked team. He also teams up with his wife to invest in real estate. Believing in yourself and what you're capable of all starts with writing down your goals and then finding the commitment and the patience to move towards that goal with persistence. Please join me in welcoming Hans to the podcast and let us know something that resonated with you. How are you, Hans?
I am well, thank you. How are you?
I am wonderful. Thank you so much for joining me. I'm really excited to hear a bit of your story. And so welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me. I appreciate the opportunity to be on the show and to hopefully provide some value to you and your guests.
Yeah, it sounds like you've had quite an incredible journey. I'm curious though, if we just take it day by day, what is something good that happened today?
So far, well, every morning I wake up and I take the dog out, and then I come back and make some breakfast for me and for her. And then I do a bit of gratitude. So I write down 3 things that I'm grateful for, typically from the day before or just what's going on generally for me. And that's always for me one of the best starts to the morning. Is it really, even if I have to force it a little bit, it puts me in a really good mindset and keeps me pretty focused on things that I'm excited about right at that moment.
I love that. Gratitude is so powerful and it can completely shift your day from, especially if you're kind of feeling frumpy to excited. Um,
Oh,
when you
100%.
when you think about doing that gratitude, because a lot of people do a gratitude, some form of gratitude practice. So when you do yours, do you have like a guideline for it? Does it have to be like a small thing and a big thing, or things that are happening currently, or like how do you decide what to pull from when you're creating your gratitude list?
It really just depends on what's going on that day. Some days, as we all know, are bigger than others. And I'm in real estate, so you sometimes will have closings, or you'll be writing a bunch of contracts, or you'll be doing all the fun stuff that like all the HGTV shows are all about. But other days, you're like, I'm gonna read some disclosure packets, and I'm probably gonna like do some errands. So it's not quite
Right.
the same excitement level. So it sort of just depends on what's going on for me in that day. And uh, so to really answer your question, no, I don't have any rules other than there has to be 3. And it just has to be something, sort of specific. It could be as simple as I am grateful for the sunrise that I'm looking at out my window right now, just to take a moment and be simple like that. Or it could be, I'm really excited because I'm working with this client who's going to be writing an offer today, and they're just wonderful people, and whatever the case, it could be bigger like that too.
Okay, so you've accomplished some pretty big things in your life. Do you think that gratitude has been a part of that? And when did you start including a gratitude practice into your daily routine?
The gratitude on a daily basis was really this year, 2019.
Mm.
Previously, I was pretty focused on goals and goal setting. I have been writing down goals for quite a long time. Actually, back in probably 2014 was when I started doing it on a more regular, not daily, but very regular basis. Because I started following Grant Cardone, and he had the 10X journal and was talking about putting your goals in front of you, writing them down, keeping them front and center in your life. Because if you're focused on your goals constantly, when tough times come up, you're going to have that to fall back on. And then even before that, I had goals posted on my wall relative to my athletic and academic goals when I was in college and in high school. But I wasn't necessarily writing them. So the gratitude really came in this year. And I have to say it's made a world of difference for me and just my attitude going through the day.
I love that. And Hans, I also really appreciate that you shared that you write down your goals every day. And I want you to share a little bit more of that with me, if you wouldn't mind,
Mm-hmm.
because a lot of people like to write down goals and plan for the day, and then they stop there.
Mm-hmm.
So how do you make sure you actually take action towards the goals you're writing down?
It's a good question. I think that question is maybe better answered by knowing yourself and knowing what's going to get you moving. Because for me, I call it more of an affirmation as opposed to a goal. Like I have goals sitting or it's posted up on my wall, right next to my computer screen where I'm sitting right now talking to you. And I look at those regularly and I know, okay, I want to get to 20 closings this year. I want to get to 20 million in volume in my real estate business. Like I have those metrics. But my affirmation that I write down every day, which is a bit different, is, I am a top producer who sells at least $20 million of real estate every year. And I write that down every single day, at least 25 times after I do my gratitude. And the reason I do that is because I want to train my subconscious to think as though I were a top producer and start looking at the world in ways of like, what would a top producer do today if he or she was selling $20 million, he in my case, obviously, but selling $20 million of real estate. And that sort of dictates then the actions that I take through the day. I would then sort of caveat that with I'm a little bit unique because I've had a lot of repetition at a high level with my athletic career. When I was training for the Olympics, I had to, develop the discipline muscle and the like time blocking and the scheduling and just the rest and the recovery and PT and the training and all that stuff. So I've sort of had a lot of reps at a lot of those things that come a little more naturally to me. So for me, it's about training my subconscious to recognize those opportunities, to use the skills that I developed during my rowing career, and execute on them when I have those opportunities through the day.
That's a great point. And for everyone who's listening to, you don't have to be an Olympic athlete to be able to be successful and take your, ideas and your affirmations and put them into action. I love though how you said, Hans, that you've like trained yourself and it was part of your training to develop those skills. And so if you were to look back to your skills on how to do the kind of repetitive skills or the repetitive actions to get you to where you need to go,
Mm-hmm.
what would be one tip from that? And I know there's probably a million, but if you think of like, oh, I know this was kind of a make it or break it deal for me, because people always want to know, well, how can I actually do that? How can I get better at implementing? How can I get better at pushing myself through the uncomfortable? So if you were to think of just like a one little tip you could give the listeners, what would one be?
Relative to pushing into something that's uncomfortable?
Yeah, so that, because a lot of times we write down goals that have to align with our dreams, and then we feel like, this is really scary, and then we get so scared we won't do it,
Mm-hmm.
and we won't even do the little tasks and that's why we'll just like write down our goals and we'll plan and we can put like a vision board and we can do all these things, and then we stop
Mm-hmm.
there because
Okay.
we spend all of our time planning. So even when you think about rowing, like in the days where you're like, oh man, this is a long day ahead of me because I'm training for the Olympics. This is going to be hard. I got to do it anyway, though. So, what
Mm-hmm.
was like a tip you can give that kind of motivated you through that uncomfortableness or the fear to just do it anyway?
I've got two that come to mind.
Okay.
One of them is to fast forward in your life 10 or 15 years once whatever this opportunity is that has potentially passed you by. And for me, it was pretty easy because rowing, as an athlete in general, you have a shelf life. You just aren't as good at 30 as you were at 25 or 35 or whatever. And um, I had to think like, okay, I've got this body, I've got this physical capacity right now that can elevate me to this Olympic podium or stage that I want to be on. And I, of course, wanted to be on the podium. We didn't quite make it, but um, it. I would fast forward to be like, okay, if I'm 40 and I've got a career and a job and I'm pursuing all these other things professionally that I might want to do, but I stopped rowing now to start pursuing those things a little earlier, will I be satisfied with that? And every single time the answer was absolutely not. And that was just like, I can't go forward knowing that I'm going to live when with regret when I can't do anything about it anymore. So that's what kept me going in
Mm.
some of those moments. And I think that is really, especially for the younger people out there, but applies to anybody. Like if you think forward of like pushing through that uncomfortable thing relative to your goals or your dream board or your vision statement or whatever, and you imagine yourself, not taking those actions over the next 5 years, and then where you're going to be and how that's going to feel, I think most people would kind of get it and take that moment to do the action today and go through a slight discomfort today to avoid that massive amount of pain tomorrow.
Mm, yeah, that's a good point because I always like to think when I'm on my deathbed, I don't want to look back and think about, oh, I could have been all these things or I could have had all these experiences. I want to look back and say, oh, I lived my life and
Totally.
that really fulfilled my heart and my desires. And some of them, sometimes we think we want something and then we get it and we're like, oh, maybe that's not quite for me. So, and to be able to have that time to shift and adjust. Um,
And I also think that you have to try things to know, and
hmm.
and it's really easy to hypothesize about like, oh, I could have done this, or I could have started that company, or I could have made that team, or I could have done blah blah blah. But until you really try, which sort of goes into my second item for answering your question, like if you don't get out there and you actually try it, um, you're never going to know, and you're never going to experience it, and you may try it for a month or two and you're like, this actually isn't what I thought it was, and I'm not getting what I wanted out of this, and I'm going to pivot over to this other thing.
Mm.
But until you get in the trenches and you actually do it, you're just not going to know, and you're not going to have that opportunity uh, to even start and know, what direction this could go, or if this is even something you want to pursue. But if you do think it is a direction you want to go, getting around some like-minded people who may not have the exact same goal but have a similar goal and are willing to hold you accountable and or do the work with you, if it's sales, making cold calls, or if it's athletics, running with you or meeting up at a certain time to hold everyone accountable, that sort of thing. I mean, that was a huge part of training for us on the rowing team. Was we would be together physically doing the work either in the boat or on the land, uh, together, and going into these places of pain, frankly, and coming out the other side having pushed each other and being better for it together. And I think having that exercise of going deep into something where it's uncomfortable with people who are like-minded can really uh, build that skill and increase that muscle towards whatever the goal is.
Mm, I love that. That is so good because the level of support, sometimes we overlook it and think that, oh, I can do this alone. But really, we all need that like support or those people that we know that are going to push us through or we're going to push them through on the hard days. And when we work together, it's life changing. I love that point.
even though a lot of us are entrepreneurs, having some kind of a support system, even if it's just like a meetup group or it's a virtual mastermind or whatever, ideally like a mentor or a team that you can like physically be with, because I think that human interaction is worth a lot. But if you can't get that, then getting, a group call, Zoom call going, um, would be the next best thing. And I think that just having that sort of interaction of like, hey, we're all in this together, even though we're kind of doing our separate things, is hugely valuable.
I love that. And I think too, like if you're into something, there's a group out there or other people out there who want to do it as well. And if there's not a Zoom group or something like that, then create one and put it together and people will come, right?
Totally.
So good. And also, Hans, I love how you said you're working on your subconscious. So as a side note, I actually do like hypnosis and stuff. That's part of what I do in my business.
Mhm.
And that is because our subconscious is so powerful. And when we want something, a lot of times that comes from like our inner child, and that's our want side, right? But our logical adult side is like no or yes, right? Depending on
Mhm.
things. And then we have our subconscious that can be our inner critic, right? Because that's developed when we're so young based off things that we're witnessing or being told or we're just hearing over and over in our environments. And so
Completely.
yeah, so I love that you are taking that and using it, and you're using the affirmations and putting it in the positive present, because people think that sounds so like hokey, but it actually works because I like to think of it as brain training. Like you're training your brain to see things a different way and to speak a different way. And when
Mhm.
you do that, then it kind of puts you into a completely different feeling, like in your emotion and your body. And then that allows you to take action in a different way. So I think that's pretty awesome that you're doing that.
Absolutely. And it does sound completely woo woo and ridiculous. And if you do it, you will feel completely woo woo and ridiculous for probably a month or two. And that's the point.
Yes, yes.
um, and because it feels ridiculous is why you should do it, because it's something that you haven't done in the past, and a lot of really successful people do it, and it's something that is a muscle that you just haven't flexed. So why not try and flex it and see what you can get out of it?
Mhm.
And that is something that I struggled with for the first month, but I just said, no, I'm going to commit to it. I'm going to do it. And the most bizarre thing is, like, opportunities continue to present themselves. Now, whether those opportunities would have come forward or not, I don't know. But I was also for sure in a place now where I can recognize those opportunities and see them as opportunities, as opposed to just some, random conversation I had with somebody or luck or whatever, and see them as something to take advantage of and grab onto and then capitalize on. Because if an opportunity comes along and you're not ready to seize it, it's really no good to you. So why not train your brain to see more of those opportunities?
Yes, I love that. Can I share an example of a story that I
Absolutely, yeah.
okay. So I was reading this book. I'm blanking the name of it right now, but one of the experiments in there that it has you do, I think it's called E cubed, and it has you do all these experiments for energy and stuff like that. So what I did was I took like a little construction paper and I cut it into a heart, and I put "You are loved" on it, and then I stuck like a $5 bill in it where you could see that there was there was money inside the heart, and I paper clipped it together. And so my family and I went around and just threw these out. Like we went to the science museum and we threw it on the ground there, and then we threw them in the parking lot and stuff like that. And then we kind of like hid because my husband was like, I have to see who picks them up. And literally we would see people walk right over them, and some would even
Mm.
look down and still walk over it. When we are preparing ourselves for opportunities, we'll be able to see them.
I do think that people in general don't spend time sort of training the inward part of their life. I think even in the entrepreneurial world and in the athletic world, which I'm a part of both now, they 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 being people are more about like set goals, make sales, do the workouts, hit these metrics, whatever these measurables are and deliverables, and do that. But we as maybe a greater society don't take the time to sort of train the inner part of ourselves to recognize these opportunities, or to just sort of square away like an area that we're deficient in and really round it out, I guess. So as hokey and as weird as it sounds like it, I just think generally people don't spend the time to train their emotions and their subconscious and that sort of thing. And that is probably why a lot of these people either didn't see it, or they saw it as like, this is a trick, or
Mm-hmm.
I'm on a hidden camera show, and who knows what could have been going through their head, because of a bunch of other false information as well that they haven't sort of trained out.
Right. Yeah, I just thought it was very interesting. But okay, so I'm curious because you've been in the Olympics and now you're also doing real estate investing and you're a realtor.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm curious, what have you learned about yourself through those two different, because you're also in a, to go to the Olympics, you have to be pretty successful in the sport that you're in, right? So you were a phenomenal rower and you're in a top real estate company, right? So
Mm-hmm.
when you look at both of those areas, being able to push yourself to get to the top, what have you learned about yourself and others, like within those journeys?
Well, I'd say the first thing is you can't do it alone. And relative to the Olympics specifically, like, yeah, I was the one physically doing all the work. Like I rowed the boat, I rowed on the rowing machine, I lifted the weights, I did all the runs, like all that stuff. That was me. I physically did that stuff. But I had a lot of support. I had family support who helped me financially when I need it. Covered some costs, some cell phone costs, whatever. The federation, U.S. rowing covered, insurance costs. I had, at the time, complete strangers and now very dear friends house me. And a lot of us had that experience where host families would take us in and let us just stay for 3-6 months and just basically join their family. And then obviously my then girlfriend and now wife was a huge support for me as well. Being able to sort of be away from her for basically a year, but she is also an Olympian from the London Games, so she totally gets it. But having the support of, she's retired, she's working, we're living on the opposite sides of the country, and yet she's like, no, you need to go do this because this is how you do it. That doesn't mean it's fun or easy, but I support you in doing it. That was huge. And then same thing with the real estate. I didn't start out on the team that I am on now, but I built a lot of basic skills with the previous team. And then an opportunity came up to join the Gunderman Group, which is the #1 team in the Oakland, Berkeley, Piedmont area, which is in the Bay Area, in California. And I recognized that like I was doing a lot of the work on my own, and I was very lone wolfy in my first team. And then I got on this team, and I realized it's a family environment. It's a lot of support, and I can scale a lot faster in my business side of things if I get in the slipstream of someone who's doing it at a high level, who's also willing to share and support, and then I'm willing to buy into that. And I think those two things were, that other people, and so having support and recognizing that and being grateful for it, coming back to the gratitude, were hugely helpful for me.
Mm, that's really great. And again, you're talking about that support and not being able to do it alone, that you work together, and you also started as a lone wolf. So I think that's important for people to realize. I know you have mentioned that, there's no overnight success, right? That it's
Correct.
taking work. Can you share a little bit more by what you mean by there's no overnight success?
Yeah. So I am probably one of the least patient people that I know. Um,
Okay.
and by that, I mean, I want it yesterday, and I want it done yesterday. I want it done right yesterday. Um,
Okay.
but I think you also have to take that back with a grain of salt and recognize, like in athletics, you're running a race. A really fast marathon is like 2 hours and some change, or just under 2 hours. I don't know what the exact record is, but it still takes 2 hours to run a marathon. Like there's a minimum amount of time that it takes for these things to go, even if you're going extremely fast. Like in a
Mm.
rowing race, 6 minutes on a 2,000 meter course is a on the erg, which is the rowing machine, is a really solid time to break, but it still takes 6 minutes of all out intense effort. It's like no matter how, and like if you go really fast, you might get into the 540s, and then there's like 10 people ever that have gone in the 530s, and that's it. But it's still going to take a minimum amount of time. So that
Mm.
overnight success thing, to me means like there's a minimum amount of time that you have to spend doing something to be good at it. And I
Mm.
don't care if you're the fastest learner ever, you still have to spend a little bit of time learning it, and you may pick it up faster than most, but it's still going to probably take you a year or two to really figure it out and to get into it, and maybe more like 3 to 5, who knows. It just depends on what you're going after. But being okay with that minimum amount of time and just recognizing that it's there and not being frustrated by it, I think is really important, and has been a huge lesson for me this year, because I wanted to, crack the 6-figure mark and sell all these houses and do all these investments and blah blah blah. Um, in my very first month being on the team, and I recognized that it took me almost to my third year to get to a point where I'm like, okay, I'm like, I'm getting to these goals. I'm finally able to achieve them. Not for a lack of effort or trying. It just takes time to really master some of these skills.
Mm-hmm. Man, that is such a great example, and actually putting it down to like the minutes, that even if you are going as hard as you can and you're a mastery of it, you still have to take a minimum amount of time. That was really great. I love those examples.
Yeah, it's really hard, especially in our generation in particular, but our tech driven society, where it's like Instagram and Facebook likes, and if it doesn't perform well in the first 10 minutes, it's probably a failure of a post and whatever. And it's like so now driven, like that that patience. And I don't even know if it's patience, but that like ability to just recognize that things take time, and it doesn't even have to be that much time. Like you can probably put a month or two into something and be eons ahead of where you were when you started, and not even recognize your progress over that time. But if you don't have enough sort of mental fortitude to like recognize that you just have to put in a little bit of work, you're probably going to get really frustrated in a week and quit.
Mm. Yeah, I love that too, that, even if you put in a month, you're still way farther ahead and you may not recognize, but you're actually moving towards your goal if you're putting in the work, right? And oh, that's so
Mm-hmm.
good. Yeah, instant gratification is definitely a muscle that I think needs to also be strengthened, on how to, not need that in every aspect of your life in order to feel value, or that you're doing the right thing.
And that being said, going back to like what we said in the beginning with committing, um, I think once you decide to commit to something, you write your goals, you have your affirmations and that sort of thing. Like commit to it as if it's going to happen like immediately, or you're making it happen as fast as possible. And going back to one of my first sort of guru, quote unquote, person, I don't think he'd like being called a guru, but Grant Cardone said something to the extent of like, if I'm going somewhere, I want to go as fast as I possibly can, because if I'm going in the wrong direction, I'm going to figure it out a whole lot quicker than
Mm.
if I'm going slow. And I think that there's something to that. Like once you set your intention, just go, just dig in and just expect, like try and get there as fast as you can. Um, and obviously you're not just like ho humming along on cruise control at 55, like, oh, it's going to take 3 years anyways, whatever. Like try and make it in two, because you'll probably find that your learning curve goes like crazy, and you'll be way farther ahead in 6 months at that speed than you otherwise would have been. But also you'll find out if it's right or wrong for you pretty quickly as well.
Yeah. Yeah, that's really, so that kind of leads me to this next question that I had. So I watched an interview, I was watching YouTube videos with you in it, and it was around your rowing days, right? And you had
Mhm.
said in one of them that we just had to execute what we were capable of. And
Yeah.
how do you feel like that applies to you today in the real estate world? And how do you know what you're capable of?
It's a great question. I am certainly in the infancy of my real estate career. I've been in the business for just under 3 years now as like a full-time person. I did some part-time stuff while I was still rowing. Um, but the answer is I don't know. So I don't know what I'm exactly capable of in this industry. I've come to believe that it's a lot, and how that sort of manifests, that's sort of the journey and that's the adventure. But I will say, when you don't know, or you don't know how to sort of gauge it, having a mentor is really important in those moments, because you want to find somebody who has been on the path that you've been, who has the life that you have, or at least has elements of it that you want, and find out how they got there, what is possible in the industry that you're going into, and then sort of see if that's the life and the path that you want to take on, and maybe set your goal based on that. Like, because who knows if you're the next Steve Jobs and you can come up with the next Apple, or if you're, some other version of some other great entrepreneur. And if you don't know how to set your sights high enough, then um, you'll never, I guess you'll never probably think big enough, for most of us at least, unless you have that inspiration of someone tangible that you can say, hey, they did it this way, they got this result, so I think I can too.
Hmm. I like that. And then that probably ties into where you're like, you got to try. When you try, you figure stuff out. And then that helps you understand what you are capable of and what you're willing to push yourself through. And also, it allows you to know when you need to pivot.
Completely.
Mm. Okay, so now you also do investing, real estate investing, and
Mhm.
you're a realtor. So do you
Mhm.
think that being a realtor has helped you strengthen your investing skills?
Completely. I am of the opinion that most real estate agents should be investors, because they have not only a knowledge base and a skill set to be an investor, but they also have the network to do it. And I think it's just like anything, like there are potential parallels in many, many skill sets that people don't exploit to their advantage, and don't help clients or customers in a way that they could very easily. Um, Being an investor, for example, like I can look at a property that someone wants to buy through the lens of a financial model that I've built for myself, and say, okay, well, if you wanted to buy this as a rental, here's what I think you would be looking at. Here's the expenses, here's the revenues, here's all this stuff. Whereas, or as versus, a single family home, take off the balance sheet hat and put on, like, okay, if we're going to change the look of this to meet your family's needs in this way and this way and this way. But they're very similar hats. And I think one absolutely increases the skill of the other. The contracts are very similar. The process of buying and selling is identical almost. And so having those parallel skill sets is just, I think it just adds more tools to your tool belt. And it's a really obvious parallel in our industry.
Mm. That's really, thank you for sharing that. I think that is insightful because I think sometimes you don't think about it that way, and how they can go together and how that can be applied in a lot of situations that we're involved in. Like if we've spent our time into something, we can find parallels and use the strengths in both.
Well, another quick obvious one is flipping houses. I think there are many realtors who have a negative opinion of house flippers, and they're entitled to their opinion. I don't share that opinion, but I do think that going through the exercise of flipping a house, which I did my first one last summer, um, I now know a lot more about a house, because I've paid contractors. I've literally dug up the yard myself. I've banged through some walls. We've overcome some challenges when we opened the walls. We found some weird stuff. We figured out how to fix it. But now I basically know how to deconstruct a house in a very different way than most of my colleagues do, because they've never gone through it themselves like
Mhm.
that. And then budgeting it out. And I can talk to someone like, oh, well, when I put my roof on the house, it was like, $7,000, but we only did one layer. But this is going to have to be torn off. So it's probably going to be more like 13, because of the labor and this and that. And so I can have a better conversation about just pricing out roofs and kitchens and this and that. So again, it goes back to being parallel. And I think a lot of industries, especially in the entrepreneurship world, have those parallels if you're open to seeing them.
And do you think that being able to flip and investing in all of that stuff allows you this space to understand people more and be able to develop deeper relationships with people you're working with?
Oh my gosh. I wrote in my bio, like, everything is the way that it is because someone made it that way. And
Mm,
understanding people is understanding the world. Like, I don't care what business you're in the people business. And
yes.
we, like, until, we get the Skynet and, like, or the Matrix becomes our reality, or some crazy sci-fi thing happens, like, people are going to be the ones in the driver's seat relative to decision making on something as simple as a paint color or something as complex as the way Facebook is put together. and
Mm.
and you have to be willing to understand people and the way that we think and interact and emote and logic or whatever, through problems and challenges and towards goals and that sort of thing. And when you can really understand people from all those different angles, buying a house, selling a house, I'm behind on my taxes, so I got to sell it at a discount. I'm a contractor and I don't feel like I'm getting paid enough, so I'm not going to show up to work today, even though you have a deadline to meet on your flip, or you're trying to move in, or what. Like, all these things are people driven, and if you understand people and understand how to work through some problems, be empathetic, you know, help them know that you care, and then you're willing to work towards a solution. Like, those are just so valuable, just beyond any single industry. Like, you will become very successful at whatever you do if you start to grasp the people element of it all.
Mm. That's so much truth there. Real talk, right? Okay, so I'm reading the book Rich Dad, Poor Dad, and I find it very inspiring because for me, I've always been in the behavioral health world. So to learn about like assets and liabilities is like really interesting to me because it's a whole new way of looking at things in my eyes. So,
Mm-hmm.
and you hear about people wanting to start developing assets, and you're actually taking that road. You're living that life right now. So,
Yep.
can you tell me about taking that leap to your first investment home or the first time you flipped? Can you share that experience and how you did that with me?
Yeah, there's a lot there. So actually, the first rental property and the first flip were almost exactly at the same time. Because my wife, or now wife, then fiance and girlfriend, uh, had the work history, because we're both 1099, she could get the loan after 2 years that I didn't have that 2 years of tax history. So she was able to buy the investment property that we were looking at, which is up in Tacoma, Washington. It's a 2-unit property that we decided to buy. It was undervalued relative to the comps around it. The rents were very, very low. They were about 50% of what a 2-bedroom, 1-bath rental unit should be going for in that neighborhood. And it needed some serious love inside. The kitchens were falling apart. There was someone smoking in one of the units for years, and so that just was gross. And both bathrooms had to be gutted. But it was a big opportunity. And then at the same time, literally, we had this flip going on, which was about 10 miles south of where I live in Hayward, California. And I had a bunch of money sunk into this flip um, already, and I was, writing $5,000 checks to the contractor, or 6,000, whatever it was, every month, every week, to get, keep this thing going and get it put back together and bring it to market. I believed wholeheartedly that these assets were going to be valuable. She did too, but we got to a point together where we were stretched both emotionally and financially in some really big ways, and probably we bit off a little bit more than we could chew there, and we ended up biting the bullet, betting on ourselves, and saying, I think we can make this work. and we figured out how to make it work. We got some help from a few people. We borrowed a little bit of money from her mom, which we paid back about 10 months later to round off that the renovation on the duplex, and got some new tenants in there. And then I sold the flip a couple of months later, made the profit that we were looking to make, and it worked out really well. But relative to like going into it, it was really scary because that was the first of each type of property that we had done.
Mm-hmm.
Um, we totally bit off way too much, but um, we had each put in multiple years of education relative to reading books, listening to podcasts, talking to other professionals who were doing the exact same thing we wanted to do, and we felt confident we could execute. And then we just had to jump in and do it. And once we did, in the long run, a year later, we're sure glad we did, because we have such a skill set and a base that far exceeds a lot of our contemporaries and our colleagues, and another revenue stream in that duplex. And we're actually now have an offer in on a 4-unit building right now, not too far in Tacoma from that first one. And so, it's, I would say it's something that feel like you can learn about, you can think about, but until you actually just decide to like, let's jump in, put an offer in, let's close this thing and let's just do it. Like that goes back to the commitment thing, and like go as fast as you can towards that goal once you've set it.
Mm. Thank you for sharing that. That's really inspiring. And I think that you said a lot of great things there, that unless you do it, that, you got to actually do it and move through it and then find out if it's the right thing for you or not. That's great. And that you're able to admit like, hey, we bit off more than we could chew, but we found a way to get through it. And again, you went to the support system, and you couldn't do it alone. You needed other people as well. And that's a great thing. I'm glad that you share that.
And I would just say, like, not to like put us on a pedestal necessarily, but we both went to the Olympic Games for Team USA. So we had a lot of faith in our ability to like figure it out,
Yeah.
because amateur athletics, there's not a lot of money in it. We lived on a very shoestring budget, so we weren't strangers to figuring out the financial side of things, and being uncomfortable in both sort of a living situation standpoint, but also financially. And so we had flexed that muscle before. And so going into this, um, we sort of knew like we could figure that part out. We figured out a lot of other things before, just relative to like airfare to Europe to race and picking up a boat and like all these logistic things. Like we just had these experiences that we then just could leverage into this new experience. And if you don't feel like you have those experiences, but you do want to get into real estate, partnerships are a completely legitimate way to do it. And I think certainly safer, and a oftentimes for people a lot better, because you get to learn without as much risk, and you probably get to learn from someone else who's more experienced in a better way by splitting the deal. And I wholeheartedly believe that if you want a partner, or you go to seek a partner, someone who's like-minded out, who's maybe just a little farther along on that journey, like that can pay dividends, because that will speed up your learning curve and hopefully save you from some pain along the way.
Great point. Because I do think how you even talked about at the very beginning, like your conscious mind, like your subconscious, right? And like your mindset. It sounds like you and your wife are both people who have really, or at least, like I would say that you've mastered your mindset, right? You've been able to really get in there. And when you commit to something, you're able to not stop and throw in the towel just because there's a hard time, right? There, like a lot of times when we think we want to do something, we'll stop as soon as it gets hard. But you guys are like, no, no, no. Hard is part of the process. We can do hard.
Yeah.
Let's do this.
Well, I mentioned this 4-unit building that we have an offer in on right now, and I saw it. It's offered at 500,000. That's double what we paid roughly for the first one. And I was like, oh man, I don't know if we can pull this off. And I was like, no, hold on, back up. I'm going to send this to the lender and say, how can we do this? Because he has my financial information. He has her financial information. That's all. That's not my job to say, like, I don't think we can do it. Let's just move on. Like, this is a screaming deal. We all know it. How can we? As opposed to, oh, we can't, it's too much. And then you have that limiting belief that holds you back, and then you like miss out on that cool opportunity.
Oh my gosh, I love that. And what an awesome question. How can we do this? It totally changes your perception.
Now, if he's like, yeah, right, then I'm like, okay, well, what would we need to do something like this? And then
Mm,
he'll be like, well, you need $100,000 in the bank, and you need, I don't know, a credit score of this and an income of
yeah.
that. And then it's like, okay, now you have new goals. Boom.
Yes, I love that. That's so awesome. Okay, you've mentioned your wife several times, so I know that she's like a huge part of your life and your heart, and she's obviously in the front of like your mind and all that you do. So it sounds like you guys are a solid team, and it even sounds like there was some long distance there for a little bit.
Oh yeah.
So what have you found is an essential ingredient in a healthy and happy relationship?
Oh man. For us, one of the things we did early on was we did the love languages,
Mm,
and we sort of talked. We both took the test independently to find out that we actually share the exact same love languages on giving and receiving, which is quality time and presence. I don't think the actual love language is presence, but it's like the general, or no, physical touch and quality time. That's the two things.
okay.
And we share those. And so we're like, okay, like, yeah, I like getting presents once in a while, but that's not like that big of a deal. If we spend quality time together and have that physical touch where we're physically in proximity, even if we're reading a book, we're holding hands or we're sitting next to each other, like that gets both of us a lot out of the other person, and helps fill the other person up. And I think understanding some of those things that are really important to the other person, of like how they receive love, how they give love, and the way that you give and receive, I think are really important as well. And then relative to the long distance thing, like obviously we're on the opposite sides of the country, so we would carve out dedicated time to like be on the phone together, share what happened in each other's days, like give each other updates, share, like we would text a lot and just share things that we were talking about or thinking about or found on the internet that were funny or whatever, and just still tried to keep that flow, that dialogue going as much as we possibly could. um, and then obviously had the proximity when we could get it.
Mm, that's great. So you definitely made it a priority and paid attention to what actually filled you guys up and depleted you, and tried not to do the things that deplete you and try to focus on the things that fill you up.
And I think that I love what you just said, because I think that advice is so important. Is like, it's know thyself, right? Like,
Mhm.
that's such a funny way to say. I love saying it that way. This makes me feel all official, but know thyself, right? Um, because I think there's so much advice out there. Like, we're having this conversation on a podcast. You've had many others. I have my podcast where I have a lot of conversations with people, and everyone's got an opinion. But the resounding experiences that I've heard, at least on my podcast and in my life, have been the people who have succeeded are the ones who really took a deep dive on what they were all about, what got them excited, what they cared about, and then went through life on those terms, as opposed to adopting somebody else's version of success or version of how you should start your day or whatever, and tried to do the square peg into the round hole thing. It's just like, when you really spend the time to know you, and then obviously your partner as well as sort of this extension of you, that's where magic can really happen, both for you personally and in a relationship.
I love that. And we all want the magic. So there we
Hmm.
go. Do you guys still row? And if so, is that like a date night thing for you guys, or
No. um, no, we don't row together. We've rowed together like probably 3 times ever. Um, not that it's just she was a lightweight woman, I was a heavyweight man. Like there just aren't opportunities to do that together except for once in a while and like a fun thing.
Mm.
Um, but frankly, she had a 16-year career. I had a 12-year career. We had our moment in the boat, and sometimes we want to like go out and row together in our singles next to each other, but um, that hasn't happened in a couple of years. But we still row for fun once in a while with some of the high school clubs, or throw together alumni groups or whatever. But we've moved on athletically into other things.
Awesome. And to your other passions. So do you okay, what side are you on? Do you feel like you could be chasing multiple goals at the same time, or do you focus on one at a time?
Oh, multiple. I'm at this point in my life, I'm 30. I'm, like I said, I feel like I'm sort of at the dawn of my career professionally. Like, I'm of the opinion that I want to put a bunch of irons in the fire and see which ones hit. Now, hopefully they all hit, and then I have to make some tough decisions, but I have a feeling that like one or two of them are going to get real hot, and those are going to grab my attention eventually. But I don't I get too bored when I'm like idle and I don't have a lot going on. So I think having multiple goals at any one time is really important, and for me, because otherwise I think I would just atrophy and shrivel up on the vine, so to speak.
Okay. Okay. And what's a limiting belief you've had to shift, and how did you change it?
Oh man, I've got like a couple that come to mind. One, so I grew really late. I was always the smallest kid up until about ninth or 10th grade. I hit a growth spurt, and then I graduated high school being one of the bigger kids in my class. But I always had this sort of mentality that I was this small, kind of weak kid. That it took me a long time through college and through my national team and Olympic career to shake that. And frankly, that sort of carried itself into my professional world as well, where I was just like, I had the imposter syndrome. I'm new. I don't know anything in this real estate world. I like, you name it, I probably had that thought go through my head. Um, and that was a huge limiting belief for me. And I had to like do some deep work on, who is this kid that I'm holding on to, and why am I like identifying with this person so much. And I actually went and saw someone professionally to work on, that part of myself, and really identify uh, why I was sort of holding on to that. And ultimately I got it. I understood where the pain was, and welcomed that version of myself back into the fold and made it okay and not shameful. And it and he that 12-year-old version of myself is still there, but in a very much happier place, to the point where it's not like a limiting belief any longer.
Mm, I love that. Thank you for sharing that.
Absolutely. I mean, that's one of those things that we don't talk about enough. Like, we all have these ideas of ourselves from some point in our life that probably hold us back because someone made fun of us, or we didn't get picked for the basketball team, or whatever it was.
Hmm.
And and those formative years are formative, and you have to, like we've said before, like, you have to retrain your brain to be like, well, okay, that was 20 years ago, that is not now. And
Right.
I have become a different person, and I can like make space for that person and like love that person, but I don't have to identify with everything that person was, because I'm different.
Right. That's a really solid point, because we needed that person to be who we are today, but that person doesn't have to dictate our experiences or how we're perceiving the world or experiencing it right now.
Oh, my work ethic, like almost 100% came from that person, because I was so pissed that I was like not picked for the A team, and was, or if I was the 12th person, was riding the bench, and I just wasn't physically big enough and able to compete. And so I just got fierce when it came to like trying to be the best I could be athletically, and that drove me all the way to the Olympics. So I have a ton of love for that person, but I also recognized there was a lot about it that wasn't serving me, and I had to work through letting a lot of that go.
And I love that. You actually have to work through letting it go. You know what I mean? You got to work through it. It doesn't just wake up one day and it's gone. You
Oh
got to put in the work. Um,
no.
so how do you recharge yourself?
Um, the obvious answer is sleep,
Okay.
but the less obvious answer is I I'm kind of a binary person. I'm either all in or I'm off. And it would maybe strike people to hear me say this, but like I don't consider myself a massive extrovert. Like I actually get drained by too much social interaction. And so when it's not like a daily thing, but like on a weekly basis, like there are I go 3 or 4 days and I'm like, I need to just unplug. I'm gonna watch some NFL videos on YouTube, or I'm gonna get a Netflix going for a couple hours before bed and like just decompress and like just be in another brain space. Like that's the way that it really works for me.
Mm, I like that. And besides gratitude, is there anything else you do to kind of pump yourself up on the hard days?
Other than gratitude, I mean, I do my affirmation, I write down my goals. I just honestly, like, I recognize that in any business, especially a commission driven business, there
Hmm.
are going to be days that are just high. Like you're going to make 20 or 50 or whatever $1,000 and like close 3 deals, and that's going to feel amazing. And then there's just going to be days or months that are just like, nothing's happening. But it's it's okay. Like looking at, like, to me, I've tried to retrain my brain to look at a long-term yearly average, because as I've said before, like you can have a huge month in May and sell nothing in June, which is what
Hmm.
happened to me this year. And then July comes around and you get a bunch of clients who are coming and knocking on the door, and then you get 3 more into contract and you're like, okay, cool, my Q2 to Q3 is going to be big, but I had to go through 6 months of like up and down and up and down and up and down. And when you start to recognize that it's a longer term game, and it's not like a day, it's not like, oh, I didn't sell anything today, I'm a failure. um, like looking at that long term average is really important. And that's like going back to the multiple goals thing. Like that's why I want to have multiple things, because when it's slow in one part of my business, I want to have a focus in another part that I can just pivot over to. Like, okay, this is a slow month, no big deal, I know where my clients are at, I know what they're doing. There's just nothing on the market that makes sense for them. I'm going to pivot over and work on this podcast or go look at some investment property or whatever it is.
Okay, I love that. And speaking of having multiple goals that you focus on, so when you think about those goals and you know that you're like there's a long game and you have a big goal in the end, but you got to take all these little steps to get there, right? And little achievements happen on the way.
Uh-huh.
How do you celebrate those smaller achievements on the way to the big one?
I don't have any particular routine per se. Like I will sort of allow myself, which is something I didn't used to do. I will allow myself now to like have an evening of like excitement around like, oh, I got a new client today. Yes, like and just be excited about that for a little bit. I don't necessarily have any reward or whatever, because that doesn't quite do it for me. But just the feeling of like letting yourself like bathe in this like success, um that's coming down all around you, that feels good. Like just feel that. Because I think when I was rowing, we always had, in college in particular, a very sort of humble mantra on our team, which was not to overwork, or excuse me, overthink the wins until we got to the national championship, which was great because it definitely kept us humble and kept us hungry. But we maybe didn't celebrate all the little wins along the way mentally the same way. And then um, when something didn't go the way we went relative to the big goal at the end of the year, which was national championship, the whole thing felt like a failure. And I think if you can take a step back and like hit those little wins, let yourself be like, yeah, I did good today. Like that was just good. And at least have that moment in the evening or immediately after it, then um, that's a good place to start. And that's usually where I start personally.
I love that because that kind of goes back to the gratitude thing too. Like you're taking a moment for gratitude and excitement for the good thing that happened. Like I don't think when a good thing happens, you have to have a piece of cake to celebrate, you know, like you said, just feeling that feeling of that excitement, that goodness can be reward in itself. That to me is the
Completely.
sense of celebrating.
And letting yourself go there mentally, because sometimes you're like, don't get cocky, don't get lazy, don't get full of yourself. Like, yes, don't do those things, but like give yourself permission to just be excited about getting your first client or your second client or your next property or whatever it is. And allow yourself to be like, yeah, that was good, I did it, that was a goal, check, now keep moving. You know, have those moments, because it's those little wins that stack up to the big ones, as you already pointed out.
Yes. Okay. A couple more questions that I ask everybody, and then I will let you go off for your day if that's okay.
Absolutely. Looking forward to it.
Okay. So, what do you think is underrated?
Patience and persistence.
Ooh. Can you tell me
And
just a little bit about that?
yeah, the patience part has to do with, you know, the long-term view of things. Like it's not an overnight success. It's something like anything worth having is worth working for. And you have to be patient for your moments because they're going to come. But you don't necessarily know when. It could be next week, it could be tomorrow, it could be, you know, when you go to your next appointment, or it could be next year. So that's the patience part. And the persistence is continuing to work even though it feels like it may not be working, even though it hurts, even though whatever the thing is that's going on for you. Like that is, again, going back to like this instant gratification culture that I think a lot of us get tied up into with Instagram and whatever. um, and being patient and persistent, because if you're patient and you wait for your shot and you're constantly working to nail that shot when it comes, you know, you're going to hit it when you have that option.
Mm, so good. Love that. And what is something you wish everyone knew?
Man, something I wish everybody knew, I would say that spending 10 or 15 minutes on your mindset in some way every day will change the trajectory of your life.
Oh my gosh, that's so good. I just got goosebumps. I love that. That's so good. And what's an experience you think that most people should have?
Huh. I mean, all my mind is going to sports, but I don't know that everyone should do sports because it's not right for everybody. I would say, to be a really sort of heady high level here, I wish for everybody that they could at least once in their life achieve what the goal is that they've set forth in their mind, and not like the watered down goal that they sort of like ended up at because they let themselves, you know, talk themselves out of a big goal. Like the big goal that they truly honestly want and would be like, this is my ideal life. If they could have that feeling of going towards that, I think that's something that everyone should have.
Ah, that's so good. I felt that one. And do you have a favorite book you would recommend for people to read or check out or listen to?
um I have a bunch that I've read. um Actually, you know, the one that I just read recently that I think is absolutely worth a read is Win Bigly by Scott Adams. He's the author of Dilbert,
Oh,
and he is, I mean, I love his writing style for one, but his advice in that book is so fantastic, in so many ways, and it's an easy read. I think it would be a fantastic book for anyone in your audience to read, because it is a little bit of a sort of motivation self-help book, but taken in a very lighthearted, comical way with some really practical thoughts and advice in there as well.
I'm going to check it out. I haven't read that book, but it sounds awesome. And do you have an exciting project you're working on right now that you can share with us?
Well, the main exciting project, which will probably be out by the time this episode airs, is my podcast called Another Way to Play. And that is the thing that's definitely taking a lot of my attention at the moment. The 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 idea of the podcast is interview based, just like this one, where talk to people who are on various paths towards freedom. And the tagline that I start every episode with is, I believe that if you trade hours for dollars, you will never achieve true freedom in your life.
Mm.
And I want to help inspire people who may be on this 9 to 5 grind, may just not really sure where they're going in their life, and then meet and hear from people who are on various steps towards their versions of freedom. Because I think freedom in this day and age is, it will transcend money, and it has to do more with time and location, and being able to control your time, enjoy this wonderful world and this one life that you get, and do it from wherever you think is worth doing it from.
That sounds really good. And I love the name Another Way to Play. That sounds really exciting. I can't wait to start listening to it. And
Awesome.
Hans, how can people contact you?
Well, I'm gonna have a website which I don't have the URL for, but I will definitely send it to you and have it so you can put it in the show notes. So that would be one. But my Instagram is where I spend a lot of time, and that Instagram handle is Chief Snah, SNAH, which is my first name backwards.
I love it. I know I was looking at it the other day and I was like, wait, is it supposed to be his name backwards? Like, is the whole thing backwards? And
So my great grandfather, quick story. My mom's side of the family were I'm like sixth or seventh generation Seattleite, and they were Scandinavians. And my great grandfather on that side of the family, as a hobby, started carving totem poles in Seattle back in like 100 years ago. And being that he was a blonde, blue-eyed Scandinavian guy, it was weird sort of that he was carving totem poles and he couldn't write Hans on these things. So he wrote Chief Sna to sound a little bit more authentic for his totem poles.
oh, I love that. That's creative.
Uh-huh. So I found that and I've adopted it as my own.
I love it. What a story. Okay, last question. What is something like a piece of advice that you've been given that is on autoplay in the back of your mind?
It's not a goal unless it's written down.
Mm, I like that. Can you share real quick, like just a snip of why that's important to write it down?
Yeah. We all have thoughts, dreams, goals, aspirations in our mind that sound really awesome, and they are really awesome because they're yours, but they're not real. They're just hypotheticals in your brain until you bring it out of your head and into the real world, meaning on paper, physical, tangible. You can touch it, you can smell it, you can lick it, you can do whatever. Like it doesn't become real. And when you put pen to paper, there's something oddly transformative about that experience relative to that goal. And then you pin it up on your wall and you look at it all the time, or you write it in a journal every day, that changes your relationship with that goal and brings it from that kind of hypothetical, woo woo world to, okay, this is part of my daily experience, and in a physical, tangible way. And I wholeheartedly believe that unless you have it written down in front of you, and more likely write it down daily, it's not going to happen.
Oh, that was so beautifully said that it becomes part of your daily experience once you start writing it down. And oh, that was so good. So, thank you so much for your time today and all that you shared. Like, it's really, you definitely have a theme around you of just commitment and perseverance and patience, even though you wanted it yesterday. You're able to tap into all of those skills. And I just really appreciate you sharing your knowledge and experience and your journey with us. So thank you so much.
Well, Stephanie, thank you for the opportunity to be on the show. This has been really awesome. You had a lot of great questions, and I'm really excited to support your podcast and your show as you continue to grow and meet more people and all that good stuff.
Thank you so much. And
thank you again for the opportunity, and thank you for your time today.
Okay, you have a beautiful day.
All right. Bye.
Bye. Thanks for listening to today's episode. Remember, you're welcome to download, share, and subscribe. As always, you can connect with me through Instagram at beautifullychanged or through my blog at beautifullychanged.com. I'm sending so much love and positivity your way. Remember, you are enough, the world needs you, and you make a positive difference. Now go out there and create your best life. Bye.